Thanks again, Ant.
Sure. Hello, are we here? Are people here? Do we know?
Yes.
Are there people all
people
over?
are starting to come in. That's the rumor anyway.
Hi. How do we know? How do we know where they are? I can't even see them. This is so strange in this virtual land that I see our panelists. I don't see y'all, wherever you are. Hello, welcome. I'm Anthony Rapp. I'm a friend of Patrick James Lynch via the poker world, which is a weird thing. Also, the poker arts world combined to bring us together years ago as friends.
It's true. It's true.
So Patrick reached out the other day and asked me if I would host this, and I was very honored. And then I watched the film, and I was even more honored because I don't know if the people tuning in have watched the film, but if you haven't, I deeply encourage you to. It's a quite moving and inspiring portrait of courage. It's also very educational and informational, but it's told with a wonderful sense of reality and intimacy. And I know that documentaries are kind of the thing that's, thanks to Netflix, they've become, quite popular, happily. But you can't always say that documentaries have a kind of focus and attention to intimate humanity as this one does, and not sensationalizing and not sort of like putting lots of exclamation points and blinding, flashing arrows on things, just letting it speak very eloquently and simply for itself. So I didn't even know as I was watching the documentary that Patrick directed it. He didn't tell me that. I found that out at the end. So Patrick is the director. Rob here on the panel was the camera operator on Everest and other places also?
Yeah. And Everest and below.
And co-producer?
Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, we have our stars, the Bombardiers. So I don't, part of what I'm going to do, I may be asking questions that everybody in the room already knows the answers to, but since I don't know who's here, I'm just going to ask questions. And I've been told that I have free reign, so there's that.
I'm going to regret that. I'm going to regret that.
I understand.
It's great.
Yeah. So I remember seeing timeline things in the documentary, but I don't have a photographic memory. So the first climb you did was, I believe, in 2011. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, Kilimanjaro.
But that was just a pure climb. You just wanted to do that as a personal challenge. You hadn't yet gotten the idea to do the 7.
Kind of, yeah. I had heard of the 7 summits and but I didn't really know how feasible that could be for me as a person with hemophilia. And I thought, Kilimanjaro is like a great test in that. And as it's probably the easiest of the 7 summits, and I was going to Africa anyway. Yeah. And so I think that was just like the first test to see if this was even a possibility. But once I did it, that's when I was like, oh, I like this a lot and I want to keep going. So that's fine. Yeah.
Can you describe what about it you like in particular?
There's just something for me, it's both the mental and physical challenge of climbing. It's, trying to stay focused when you're in pretty uncomfortable situations, and encouraging yourself and, convincing yourself to keep taking another step forward, even when you're tired and it's cold and, you're not comfortable. I love that mental challenge. And then I just love the physical challenge of, pushing your body and seeing how far you can go. And I think it was fun to see, especially combining that with my bleeding disorder, to see really how far I could push it. And that's what I like about climbing. And I love waking up on the mountain and you get out of your tent and you just see this incredible view. And there's just nothing that beats being in these spaces that not a lot of people get to see.
I can imagine. Regarding the bleeding disorder and climbing, since you have the factor with you, when you're using the factor on a regular basis, what are the risks of bad things happening relative to bleeding?
Yeah.
When you're using that stuff.
That's a really good question. The goal is to hopefully take my medicine at the right timing, that, even if something does happen, I'm at least protected to a certain point, that it won't be an excessive bleeding. But there is always that risk of, some big ice rack, on Everest falling, and well, that's bad for anybody, but, if it hits me just in the right way, develop a pretty bad bleed. So even if I have some factor on board, a big trauma is probably not going to be great. And I'm going to have to get some more factor on board to control that bleeding. But you know, it's like on a level that prevented any, you know, like most bleeding episodes wouldn't be an issue. You know, it kind of, I was mostly normal, normal.
And like you have to obviously plan out exactly how much you need to take with you.
Yeah.
You have to allow for some difference in the number of days, right? Especially on something like Everest, right? Because
yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah. So I actually worked with my, you know, treatment center to kind of figure that out, like what the schedule for infusions were going to be on most of the mountains. Most of them were pretty normal as far as what I was going to do, regardless if I was on a mountain or not. But like on Everest, there's a couple of places that you have to worry about some things, especially falling on you, that I wanted to make sure I had my best, like highest level when I went through that section. But yeah, we had to work together to figure out a plan and like how much medicine that was going to probably need. And then like in the event something really bad happened and I got stuck there for a while, how much more I would need. And luckily I didn't need to use any of that medicine, but yeah, we had to calculate all of that and figure it out beforehand, which is interesting.
And is the thinner oxygen at all a possible factor in bleeding also?
Well, I don't think my doctors, sorry. My doctors didn't think so, but they weren't like 100% sure because nobody with hemophilia had gone up there. I think their thinking was, you know, with hemophilia, you're just missing a protein in your blood. And if I get an infusion with that protein, you know, essentially like that variable's out of the mix.
Sure.
So, you know, they were thinking it'd probably be the same. But like I said, they didn't know for sure. Like nobody had been up there with hemophilia before. So yeah, but they felt pretty confident, I think. Or else they probably wouldn't have let me go for it.
Yeah. And does the factor also limit or eliminate or just limit the possibility of like the joint related issues?
You know, it's really interesting. So for a lot of people with hemophilia, like their joints are their main places where they get bleeds. And for some reason, that just never was the part of my body that was impacted by hemophilia. I do have pretty good arthritis in my knees, and I don't know whether that's from, you know, baseball, climbing, skiing, all of that stuff, or hemophilia related. But that was just like a never. So actually, my joints have always been in pretty good shape. So that, yeah, I always had muscle bleeds more. That's like my issue thing. So if I pull a muscle or get hit in a muscle, I've had tons of those bleeds, which is interesting. So that's kind of very different, I guess, about my experience with hemophilia compared to like Patrick's.
Understandable.
Yeah.
So being back, so one thing that was a little, it was fairly clear, but it was a little, I had some mystery around when you guys went together to Nepal and you both went to base camp. And then you had one or two, you had the one, like there were a couple of the ways you went up and then back down and during the acclimatizing. During some of that time, you were both still together. It was a little unclear when in that process you parted. That was a little, yeah.
Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, so we went to base camp together, and then I spent, was it just 2 nights?
I think
3 nights at base camp, and then I left. So I left before Chris even started his first.
The first acclimatizing thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And when you going to base camp is clearly it's a quite a thing unto itself. Like you're doing a fair amount of hiking-ish. Like what is that trip like to base camp when you're just doing base camp?
Was it 5 days total?
It was 9 days.
Oh, 9 days total. Okay, so we did like
Trekking.
We did 1 day of trekking and then 1 rest day, and then 1 day of trekking and 1 rest day. So it alternated. So I think it was 5 total days of actual hiking. I think similar.
Yeah.
We lost Rob for a couple of them there, but he caught back up, right? Or no, Lori.
Me?
Lori.
Yeah, I was
Lori
there.
for a couple of them there.
She had like a long.
There were a
thing.
couple people that weren't feeling super great
Yeah.
and stayed back.
Yeah.
You're already acclimatizing there, right? Like you're already at pretty high altitude, correct? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So at Lukla, you actually, when the plane lands, you're at almost 10,000 feet right there. So yeah, you're getting up there pretty quick, and yeah, your body just needs to adjust, which yeah it's tough.
So this is not at all the same thing. When I've been on touring productions of shows, when we go into Denver or Salt Lake City, they have had oxygen in the wings for us.
Yeah.
And no joke, but like singing songs, sometimes dancing and singing songs, I've never taken the oxygen, but there are times when you just feel your lungs like trying to hold a note. And that's just in our little, mile high kind of situation.
Yeah.
Does that help you? But coming from Denver, does that give you a little bit of a leg up? I mean,
yeah, totally. And before we left to go to Nepal, I think it was like 1 or 2 days before we left, I went and climbed a 14er, so a 14,000 foot mountain, to like get that extra acclimatization before we even went to Nepal. Just to kind of get that advantage. So I think there definitely is an advantage to living in Colorado and doing mountaineering stuff, just because you can get to 14,000 feet pretty easily. So actually, before most of the climbs, I would do that. And before I left, I'd go do a 14er and come down, so I'd have that advantage. So it's pretty cool.
And Patrick, when did you get involved with this project and know that you were going to be making a film about it? Because there's somebody filming back in 2011. Was that you were involved then?
No, I got involved the beginning of 2016, and then fortunately we had footage from 2011 on, and archival material that we could build the story out around, so that we could contextualize Everest within this 7 summits journey and not just rely on the one trip to demonstrate Chris's commitment to this mission, and also to take the audience around the world. I mean, what a neat opportunity to see just some beautiful places from all around the world.
Was that drone photography?
Yes, amongst other things, yes. And the drone photography in Nepal, I guess I can say this now, we did not necessarily have the paperwork needed to get the shots that we did, and we're told that it was pretty severe if we were caught, which we interpreted as, okay, extraordinary judiciousness. And we waited till we found just the perfect spot to open it up while we were in Kathmandu.
Yeah, you asked for forgiveness rather than permission, right?
Correct, absolutely.
Right?
100%.
And then run quickly, yeah.
Yes.
Put it away and run, yeah.
But like the talking heads interviews on the couches and in the houses, were those all done 16 on?
Those were done between December of 17 and when we left for Nepal in, what was it, early March of
December
17? December of 16,
yeah.
March of 17. So that 3.5, 4 month period.
Too. There was some
Correct.
after that we picked up later, yeah.
And
interestingly about that, sorry, just a little kind of interesting tidbit from that period. There's interviews with Jess, and then we use one moment from Jess, Chris's mom and dad, the 3 of them on the couch together. That was filmed. We had one day where we could film with Jess and Chris's parents in between when Jess got home from base camp, and fingers crossed when Chris would reach the summit. So for that follow-on experience, we had one day where production and people were available, and we got what we needed. But yeah, it was no margin.
So you were the one there in those sessions as director, having those
Correct.
interviews, but you were not obviously climbing Everest.
Was not climbing Everest. So yeah, when we got to Nepal, we did the home visits. We did the visit to the treatment center and other things that didn't necessarily make it. And then Chris and I had, as well for me especially, a very emotional dinner on our final night in Kathmandu, because the next day he, Rob, and Jess were going to go on to the mountain, and Josh Bragg, our cinematographer, Dave Beatty, our sound op, and I were going to hang out in Kathmandu for a couple days and then head on home, get some more B-roll and head on home. So that was an interesting moment to kind of acknowledge, okay, right now my role in this capacity is, done to a large degree for a little while. And it so happens to be on Everest. So it was an interesting process from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you, Rob, have climbed other mountains before you climbed Everest, I assume?
Yeah, although I did not climb up Everest. I was just at base camp. So I went to base camp. I had our kind of our base camp but the film's base camp set up at base camp, which was pretty much just me. And then his guides were the ones who would kind of take GoPros up with Chris and shoot with him on the mountain itself.
Got it.
Yeah. So I didn't
It
go
was a
all the way.
total
I got
team effort.
halfway.
Yeah.
17.5, I guess.
And how did you come to choose? Because I imagine there are tons of different companies that run these climbs, correct?
Yeah.
How did you find the one that you were going to partner with, and what kind of permissions, or not permission, but what kind of participation did they agree to do a documentary, and like how did that all happen?
Yeah, so I climbed Everest with Mountain Professionals, so that was a company that I had climbed a lot of the other summits with. I ended up climbing 5 of the 7 with Mountain Professionals, and I actually connected with them through kind of a friend of a friend situation in Colorado. So Ryan Waters is the head guide for Mountain Professionals, or the owner. Owner, head guide. He's like everything, but his friend worked for an organization that worked with our hemophilia camp in Colorado. And after Kili, I was climbing with them with this hemophilia group in Colorado and talking to him. And he's like, "Oh, my buddy runs a climbing, guide service. You want to talk to him?" And so I reached out to Ryan, and he's just super cool and laid back. And even talking about the hemophilia stuff, he wasn't like, "Oh, I'm not doing that." He was like, "Okay, let's talk about it and see what it's about." And he was super interested in making it happen and making sure it was safe. But and then when we talked about the documentary, he was all about it. He was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And he was super interested in like helping us figure it out. And he did a lot of the filming above base camp with Tashi, one of the amazing guys we climbed with. So yeah, he was super cool about it, which is cool.
And we gave him a little bit of background on Chris's medicine in Colorado before we left, so he knew kind of what the whole procedure was and when to give it and when not to. And then when we got to base camp, he practiced, was it 1 or 2 infusions, I think?
Yeah, several times.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so he was familiar with it before we went, which is good.
And how much are people filming on Everest generally? Do you have a sense of that? Like,
I think everybody's filming nowadays. Everybody's got
a lot.
But I mean, it's amazing what you can get from those GoPros now. Like they're amazing, and they're small and light. But like carrying the batteries up and remembering to charge stuff and like switch memory cards, and like that was a lot. But yeah, everybody's got GoPros and stuff up there. Ryan carried a nice camera up part of the way, but once you get higher, you don't want to carry that much extra weight. So yeah, it's all GoPros, which is cool.
Now, were you surprised when a couple of your companions in the group peeled off before the summit?
Yeah. I was totally surprised because I felt like we had a pretty strong team the whole time. Everybody had good and bad days on the mountain. But yeah, the higher you got, it just got harder and harder. But I didn't know that anybody turned back until I got back down to Camp 4, which was really interesting. And I do have to point out that Kat in the movie, she was climbing another mountain called Lhotse. So she had already done Everest. So she was climbing a mountain that peeled off from Everest that's way, way like scarier than Everest. And yeah, she just got a little freaked out because it's a scary, scary mountain. So I was kind of glad that I heard that she turned around and came down. But yeah, anyway. So anyway, that was a tangent, I guess, but.
Are those ladders permanent-ish?
Well, for part of the season, but yeah, those ladders that they put across, there's a team that's called the Icefall Doctors of a bunch of Sherpas that put those ladders in, but the ice fall is moving throughout the whole season. So different sections collapse and fall, and they have to go through and fix the route after things collapse. And you can hear it creaking and popping while you're in there. And it's a very like scary place. It's very beautiful, but terrifying at the same time.
It's like 6 feet a day, right? It was like sliding down 6 feet a day. So they move things a lot, I felt.
I don't remember like, yeah, the speed, but you can hear it for sure, which is weird. And it changes. So it's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Now, when you think of all the different mountains, is Everest the difficulty and the majesty and everything? Is it a factor of how many more than the other mountains? Do you think of it in those terms?
I think Everest is just very different than the other of the 7 summits. You know, as far as like physical difficulty, I would say like Denali, you know, in Alaska was kind of up there too. In a different way though, like Denali, you're climbing, there's nobody helping you carry gear. Like you're carrying everything you have. There's like no Sherpas that are helping, and the weather conditions are really hard on Denali. And Everest is just a whole different beast. I think the mental challenge of Everest was a lot harder than I anticipated, and it was more of the waiting, sitting and waiting part that was so hard. So the other mountains, you slowly work your way up till you hit the summit, whereas Everest, you do these rotations and go back to base camp and just wait. And between our second rotation and our summit push was 16 days of just sitting there.
That's waiting for weather or waiting for?
Yeah, waiting for weather. So the jet stream essentially sits on top of Everest, so the winds are just insane. So you have to wait till it moves north. And we were waiting for the rope to get fixed to the summit, and then we could go after that. And the weather just wasn't cooperating, so we were just waiting and waiting. And that was like the most stressful 2 weeks, because we also can't do a whole lot at base camp. You can go hike a couple places around base camp, but we played so many like card games, and Rob had like 4 movies on his computer that we watched a couple times. Like, you know, it was rough.
What are you eating?
At base camp, we were eating real good food. Like they had a full kitchen. They baked Rob a birthday cake on his birthday. Like that
was amazing. It was well-made food, but it was all canned food. It was all, you know, like canned peas and Spam. We had a lot of Spam.
We did.
But they prepared it really well. It was delicious.
We did have a lot of lentils too. I was really over lentils at the end, but that's okay. And then on the mountain, it's a lot of like freeze-dried, you know, mountain food, which is, you know, it's not bad. It's fine. And a lot of Snickers bars. I ate tons of Snickers bars, which was great. I had like 40 of them or something. It was great.
Yeah. Do you, at the end of the film, you have a moment, spoiler alert, where you say, what am I doing next?
Yeah.
You going to answer that question for it? Like, did that become a question that started to make its answer known to you?
A little bit. And I think it was kind of something that I already knew where I wanted to go. And that was to actually do the work of helping people with hemophilia in developing countries. So by the time even Everest hit, you know, I was already getting my master's degree in global health because I knew I wanted to do that kind of work. And so since the end of the movie, I got an opportunity to work for Save One Life and become executive director. And like that, I think, is the new adventure of like putting that passion into a different avenue and seeing what other change I can bring, which is really cool. It's a very different kind of challenge and adventure, but it's the same passion, which is cool.
And how many people work at Save One Life? Like how large or small an organization is it?
There's 5 of us. So we're pretty small, but I feel like we do a lot for five people. And we work in 14 countries. And we work with about 50 partner organizations in those 14 countries. So even though we're small, I feel like we have a pretty big impact, and we're just slowly growing that, which is really cool to see.
And how do you determine which of the 14, which countries become part of your orbit? Yeah,
you know, it a lot has to do with need, but also, you know, where, you know, our founder had a lot to do with where we ended up to start with, you know, just by where she had traveled before and who she had known and where she had connected. And now it's like, you know, where we find good organizations to work with in these countries. And actually one of our newer programs is helping to establish hemophilia organizations in some countries that don't have them at all, which is really a cool new step that we're taking, which is exciting. So yeah, but trying to look at where the places are that have the most need is where we're kind of looking towards. So.
And is there any prevalence anywhere in particular that seems like maybe there's a little more prevalence than other places, or is it just sort of like generally the same kind of basic numbers no matter where you are in the world?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. So hemophilia is an interesting condition because it is equally distributed around the world. So hemophilia exists everywhere. And I don't think that there's a higher prevalence in any countries. At least I've never heard of that. And Patrick might be able to speak to that too. But yeah, it's equally distributed around the world. The problem is it's not diagnosed in most developing countries. So a lot of times physicians there don't think that there's hemophilia because they've never diagnosed anybody. And they have a lot of other medical concerns to think about. So they're not thinking hemophilia generally. So that's a big challenge. So I think right now there's like only half of the people in the world that have hemophilia are actually diagnosed, and most of those are in developed countries. I think it's under half, right? Like 40-some%. So
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier, Patrick. Your organization, can you say a little bit more about the work that you're doing also for the folks at home?
Yeah, of course. So Believe Limited is, we're a content agency and a production company that seeks to create entertainment that affects change and makes a difference. In fact, so I was doing a project in New York 10 plus years ago at a harm reduction center in the Lower East Side. And through that project, which was like a drama therapy docu experimental project, found how much I loved using storytelling and my skills as a producer, director, storyteller, and the network I was building to put something on that I could actually see impacting people in real time. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So my impact is going to be made through entertainment and content. How do I do that? So that was the origin for Believe Limited. And now we have a great content agency. We have a number of feature and short films. We had a short film that was shortlisted for the Oscars this year, which was an amazing sort of moment. But yeah, and then we look for opportunities like this one to partner with people who have a vision, a mission, and are looking for the right people to hop on board, who have, you know, a unique value add. So I like to think that we're often in a spot where we're the third piece of the triangle sometimes, as I like to say. So in this instance, like Chris with the vision and the mission, but in order to get it done, obviously there's the need for funding and support behind it. But then where's the piece where that all can come together through story in a way that permeates and reaches as many people as possible? And that's where Believe Limited comes in.
Cool. And Rob, you work with Believe, or you've worked with Chris?
I worked with Believe. I've known Patrick from back in our New York days, and tagged along to the West Coast 5 or 6 years ago, I think. But yeah, I've known Patrick. So Patrick used to be my one and only touch point with hemophilia until I came full time into the world, and now it's everything pretty much. It's most of what we do and most of the stories we tell.
Yeah. And Jess, when you were embarking on this part of the journey of a documentary, did you have to, for yourself, say, okay, I'm going to be a little bit in the public eye and I got to like take a deep breath and get ready for that? Or was that something you were totally ready and willing to do no matter what? Because alongside the other stresses of having him go off and risk his life, etc., was that consideration for you at all?
No, actually, I don't feel like it was. I mean, I think the fact that we were good friends with Rob and Patrick beforehand, and they make everything feel so comfortable too, even though there's like cameras around, and they just make you feel really comfortable. So I don't feel like there was ever a moment where I felt like I had to censor myself because I was gonna be on screen. Plus, I also knew that they would censor me for me, which I think they probably did a lot of.
Did you? No.
No, I mean, you know, one of the hardest things actually is we were cutting the film down after getting it in a shape and a length that felt like, okay, we're getting there, and now we got to whittle. Unfortunately, a lot of times it would be kind of like moments where, you know, a character pops a little bit. But it doesn't serve story, and so when we're looking to really be efficient, you wind up losing some moments at the end that, you know, you're kind of like, well, but that's all it's part of the game.
Yeah.
I razz Patrick a little bit because the first like few cuts of the movie that we saw, I had a lot of really good jokes in there, and I was very proud of that. And then as it like the movie progressed, now Kathy, Chris's mom, has more jokes than I do, and I'm still really bitter about that.
I understand. I mean, I remember the first time that I saw myself on a big screen when I was 15. It kind of blew my mind a little bit, like in a weird, like I definitely like, what is happening? Was there any of that aspect for you? Or because now we live in such a world where we're always on screen, so maybe it's not quite the same thing. But did you have any issues?
Oh, it was bizarre. It was really strange.
Yeah, it was super weird. I felt very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
With my like face that big on like when we saw it in a real movie theater, I was like, this is just the weirdest thing ever. And I didn't really like it too much.
It was weird, but also cool.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it was like a bunch of different emotions, but very weird.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a better way of putting it.
I've had the experience of when I watch a film that I've done, I remember the day we did it. I remember what was happening, all those things. I imagine it's similar for a documentary when you're watching back, like, or not, or does it just seem like it's this other person, or? Myself play a character. You're watching yourself, so it's...
I think for like the Everest footage and stuff, I remember the day specifically, and then like there's it was like 2 months of it, so cut down to minutes of it. And so I remember a lot of the days that like we're never gonna make the film because they're boring, and like the little stories or something about like the day Rob and I walked to Gork Shep and got some Pringles, or like or got a Coke because we had nothing to do that day, that we're never gonna be in a movie. So yeah, I remember those things, which is kind of cool. Brings it back to life,
Sure.
It's funny because on the production side, I find that there's a point in the edit where I like stop remembering what my experience was on the day, or even like where my literal eyeball perspective was, and I just remember that for like what I've stared at now 75, 100, 150 times, and that becomes all I can then remember from the experience, which is a very odd flip of, because otherwise, yes, if I'm in something, I remember the 360 of it, but when I see it, then it's like I don't actually remember what I did on the day. The reality's gone away. I'm now living the film.
Yeah. I would say that I actually kind of have stopped watching the film now, because I went to a bunch of screenings, and it was cool, but then I felt like I started remembering things through the film instead of like my actual experience, and so I haven't actually watched it in a while, which I think is fine because I have that experience. But yeah, it was kind of weird to like be like, wait a minute, I'm like losing what that really felt like. And so I don't know.
Interesting.
I would also, I had to keep a journal of basically all the shots that I was taking while we were at base camp, all the interviews and everything, and kind of jot notes about them. So like my experience is all just based on Chris. I'd be like, oh, that's the day that Chris did this, and then, or that's the day that Chris did that. That's really cute. Or like the chapstick story, which is one of my favorites, which maybe needs to find its way into the bloopers somehow.
We don't need to talk about that.
Yeah, we're gonna make a blooper reel.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat about blooper reel. Will there be any extended cut or some blooper reel or anything like that?
I don't think so.
we definitely have deleted scenes and outtakes and that kind of stuff. So on the 18th, we just released digitally worldwide, and now the next step will be, some kind of DVD release a little bit down the road. So perhaps they'll work their way onto there. We haven't actually made those decisions yet, but I'm sure we'll be looking to put more content on there.
I think Chris trying to...
Suggestions box where we can...
No, I don't think...
Yes. Did you say a decision box? Is that what you said? Like...
A suggestion box.
Yes.
And what kind of work are you doing now, Jess? Because you guys met when you were working at the organization in Denver, correct?
Yeah, we met at work at the University of Colorado. We were both scientists working in the lab there. And I actually still do science work. So I'm working at a company called Alnylam in Cambridge, doing similar work.
Well, one of the things that you were described as doing was removing the nervous system from a mouse?
I still do that.
Why do you do that? Like, well, not you, but why does one remove his nervous system from a mouse?
I work in the CNS department, And so we're
That's central nervous
Here,
system.
you just said
Oh, okay, sorry. Sometimes she just says that, and
so we are developing drugs for diseases in the central nervous system. And so we remove those areas of the animal to be able to test them.
see if the drugs are working.
Yeah.
So you can you take it out. So the brain and spine and nerves, you can take them all out. One thing.
In pieces, yes.
And then you put medicine on the thing that's taken out of the mouse.
No, medicine goes in first, and then you got the
You
pieces.
study the after effect. Okay, all right. Incredible. That was one of those details that I had to stop and really wonder at.
Yeah.
I picture like a tweezer just going like.
Well,
I
that's
understand.
close.
I understand. Very good.
I can show you a picture later.
Okay, cool. Yeah, excellent. Do they have bleeding disorders in mice too? No. Do they? Do we know?
There's sort of manufactured ones.
Yeah, and yeah, they do.
Mice? I'm sorry. What? You manufacture to try to test treatment?
Yeah,
You
can
manufacture the hemophilia in the mouse.
In the mouth.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Very clear.
Yeah, the
Thank
poor mice really get the short end of the stick in these
I know.
scenarios.
I know, short lives, little bodies, and then
Sometimes no nervous system.
I understand. I understand. So the work that you're doing now with your organization, and you mentioned, I think it was before we did the session, you were talking about doing more climbs, more fundraising. Can you talk a little bit about the push of the work that you're doing, the focus of the work you're doing at the moment?
Would Save One Life?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the big part of our program is in where it kind of started was a child sponsorship program, and that's kind of highlighted in the film too. Is our founder Lori Kelly noticed when she was traveling internationally that while in some countries, maybe there is some access to medicine in a central hospital. A lot of the patients that lived in rural areas or just outside the city, or just even in the city, but in kind of in the poorer areas, couldn't afford the transportation costs just even to get to the hospital, where there might be limited care, even if it wasn't factor, but some sort of other care. And when she saw that, and with some input from a community member, she came up with the idea of this child sponsorship program to help, give money to these families that they could afford that travel to the hospital, but also to help cover a lot of other needs like staying in school. So a lot of the people in developing countries with bleeding disorders have pretty bad, disabilities from, untreated bleeds. And so being able to continue their education and get an education and get a job that they don't have to do, manual labor or move a lot, can be really important. So that's what these sponsorship funds can be used for. And, even now, right, with COVID going on, where most of their parents can't work because they're in lockdown, it's going just to help pay for food and stuff right now. So that's one of the programs. And then we've developed some other programs that complement that, like a college scholarship program, so they can continue that education and get even better jobs. A micro enterprise grant program where they can start their own small businesses, so that they can maybe work from their home doing something, but they can provide for themselves. We help fund summer camps, so kids can get together and connect with each other and build community, which is really cool. And then we're starting a few other programs, which is really cool, just to like I said, go out into communities or into countries that have no hemophilia community and help them start one, which is really cool. So yeah, we're trying to get into more countries to help more kids, and we're building those other programs with more funding so we can provide more scholarships and grants, and impacting that way, which is really cool. It's been great.
And I know in the film, you went to Nepal. Have you yourself gone to some of the other, I guess this is all pre-COVID.
Yeah. Last year I went to 6 countries, I think, last year. So I went to Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, India, the Philippines. I went to 5 countries for work, and then I went to Italy for fun. But 5 countries last year. And it's so wonderful to like meet, you know, the community in these countries, because you have this instant connection, which is just really special. But it's also just really inspiring to watch them, you know, build these organizations and advocate for, you know, getting medication. And like when we were visiting in India, the country's starting to buy factor for the first time. And it's like so cool to see these like leaps that these places are starting to take. And it's just really inspiring to meet these people that are overcoming some just major challenges, which is really powerful.
So when you say India was buying factor for the first time, what were they doing before then? Nothing?
A lot of countries just rely on donations right now for factor.
Oh, you mean like the government was buying?
Yeah, sorry, the government's finally buying factor. Yeah, so the patients can access it without having to pay for it too, which is just incredible. Yeah, it's super exciting. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think you alluded to this, but the organizations that you work with on the ground, how do you find them? Like, how do you, and if you say if there's no hemophilia community as such in a country, how do you start one?
Yeah, so a lot of the communities have been started by people reaching out to our founder, Lori, and she like finds, you know, a patient or a parent of a patient, and that's who end up starting a hemophilia organization in that country. So that's where it starts from, is usually one person or a doctor that identified a patient and they're like, we need to do something more. And they build from there. So it's usually just trying to find that one leader and helping them build that organization and helping guide them and help them figure out how to overcome challenges in their country. Obviously, like, we don't know exactly what they need in that specific country, but just help give them advice so that they can figure it out, which is cool.
And I'll just add to that to say too, like Rob and I have gotten to travel quite a bit to see what hemophilia looks like around the world. And I feel like that individual Chris was just speaking to, like, it often starts with one person stepping forward. My experience from being places is that it is often one individual who is also keeping it going or moving it forward, or is the reason the clinic at the hospital runs so fluidly, or is the reason the advocacy work is organized and happening in a way that the government's responding to. Like, the power of one is always important to appreciate no matter what. But I think in those circumstances, it's to get it going and then to keep it going. It seems like it really is up to those people who have energy and commitment, unlike a normal person, to be quite honest. The energy and commitment that some of the people I have met have for the work they do in spite of circumstances, it's hard to process at times, because it is facing challenges daily that I wouldn't be able to survive it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when we're talking numbers, I know that it's alluded to, like 1 in 10,000. Is that what I?
Yeah, it's 1 in 10,000 births. So it primarily presents in males. So 1 in 5,000 male births or 1 in 10,000 live births are two different ways you could kind of look at the numbers. I tend to go with the 1 in 10,000 just to take the gender piece out a little bit, because that's a whole topic in and of itself.
Yeah. And so the organization, is there like a national U.S. hemophilia organization? What is that called, that organization?
Yeah, there's two preeminent organizations. There's the National Hemophilia Foundation and there's the Hemophilia Federation of America. Coincidentally, the way everything has shifted and gone virtual this year, one just had 2 weeks ago, and one is about to have next week their annual conferences. So our film is coming out at quite an interesting, busy time in the hemophilia world. And the National Hemophilia Foundation is where we had our first screening of the film for any kind of public about 1.5 years, or I guess coming up on 2 years ago, pretty soon, which was just an extraordinary experience. And to be able to share it with so many people from around the country at one time, that was unforgettable.
Yeah. And in those organizations, what are the numbers of people who belong or are represented by those organizations? Do you know? Do you have
well, I think there's something like 52 2, 4, 6, mid-50s of what we call the chapters of the National Hemophilia Foundation. So most states have one, some smaller states are combined, some states like California have many, but it's somewhere in the 50s some odd. And the Hemophilia Federation of America has member organizations. I don't believe the number is quite as high, and some are in one and not in the other. They do have slightly different missions, and actually, interestingly enough, both have new CEOs for the first time in a decade plus at both organizations. So between COVID, that leadership change, and some of the medical breakthroughs that we're experiencing in real time in hemophilia these days, there's a lot of newness to appreciate and try to capitalize on too, to make sure that the programs that are working really well continue to get the support they need, and maybe to let go of those that this is a convenient time to be honest about.
Is there any medical breakthrough that you wanted that is particularly like that you can point to that's exciting and shareable, or is it too early? I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, so just this week we found out that the first gene therapy for hemophilia A, which had been submitted to the FDA for consideration, was denied. The application was denied. So it could have been commercially available imminently, and instead it's denied, and it will be another few years before that particular drug and company have a chance to reapply and have the data reviewed. There are many other companies working on gene therapy. But it was an interesting moment this week to learn, okay, not yet. And here's why, here's what they're looking for. That's interesting to learn. But to go kind of back to our conversation, it is really interesting where we are scientifically with gene therapy right now for hemophilia and more broadly, because hemophilia is fortunate as a rare disease. 95% of rare diseases, there's not one FDA approved medication to treat them. So we're talking about untreated and often inherited chronic. So these are children without medicine, 95%. Hemophilia, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of scientific work that has been done the last number of decades. Gene therapy, though, is, I mean, it promises a functional cure. You know, it's a buzzy and charged word to use, but functional cure, that is in essence what it's promising, but only for those for whom it's available and who don't have immunity to potentially the virus vector being used, et cetera, et cetera. But what are we going to be doing for people all around the world, for the 75% that live in countries that don't have ready access? Are they going to be able to move toward the front of the line when a potential, who could use a one and done type of medication more than someone who is living in Nepal, 2 hours away from Kathmandu? They need it much more than someone like me, even if my burden of infusing intravenously could be improved upon. But unfortunately, the systems that are in place don't necessarily distribute the medicine accordingly. So it's up to people like Chris, and frankly too, up to people like me and the work that Believe does, to make sure we're continuing to tell these stories and make sure people are aware that while we are having, you know, I just named one little medical moment, but the last couple of years, there have been very positive ones. There have been a couple of new things that have come to the market that have been absolute game changers. And it's important that we appreciate who they're game changers for and not forget those who do get left behind. You know, you were asking us earlier too about hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. Well, when we talk about a cure for hemophilia and the National Hemophilia Foundation, it is the National Bleeding Disorders Organization. Well, what happens when hemophilia A has some gene therapy products out and can be cured? What happens to the economic engine that generates? What happens to all of the downstream that is affected by something like that? So it's important that we not forget about the other bleeding disorders who stand to suffer if hemophilia A gets treated well and we all just sort of go back into our camps. Women with bleeding disorders, on average, it takes 14 years to go from first identified symptom to diagnosis. I'm going to say it again because it's kind of astounding. 14 years from first diagnosed symptom. So the first time someone goes, oh, and we have a symptom, 14 years to get a proper bleeding disorders diagnosis. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I guess that's sort of the point of Bombardier Blood in a big way, is like what Chris did is extraordinary and is representative of this incredible moment that we are in. But at the same time, there are critical needs all around the world, and both things can be true, and both things need appropriate attention.
Sure. Yes.
I got a little soapboxy there, sorry.
Oh, I 100% agree. Do you feel like this is doing that? I feel like it is watching it. I mean, I feel like it's telling the story appropriate to make me aware and seek out more information. And I mean, you know, I mean, I have a vested interest. I'm your friend. That's part of it, but that's not all of it by any means.
Sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, we made the decision, and I have to give a lot of credit to our editor, Steven Sander, who's brilliant. And, you know, he's from the UK. He doesn't have a bleeding disorder. So he had a different perspective. He had different kinds of questions. So he made for a great, essentially, writing partner through the process. But yeah, we did want to make it very, very clear that there was a tremendous need that we have to pay attention to. And yet we also wanted to celebrate Chris. So there was a lot of conversation about kind of how to structure our story in a way to accomplish both, and to make sure right in the beginning that we are hooking people with what we want them to be paying attention to. I mean, we do start the film pretty strong. In some ways, I feel like we kind of grab people and then just like don't let you go for a while. And then eventually it's like, okay, so here's some nice stuff. Here's a joke. And, you know, rightly or wrongly, but we wanted to make it abundantly clear what the stakes were, so that the very first time you hear someone in Nepal speaking about hemophilia, you've already seen visuals, you already have a sense of what the problem is. But even before that, I'm getting a little bit technical now, but even before that, we meet Chris on the mountain and see him kind of struggling with an infusion. That was also very purposefully placed there, because Chris's needle phobia is very real and can be very problematic and needs to be taken seriously, especially when he's by himself in the wilderness. At the same time, when you juxtapose that to an 11-year-old who has a knee the size of a volleyball, it's difficult to muster the empathy for Chris because the need over here just steals so much attention. And again, rightly so. So we had to just be mindful of how we structured things so that, okay, we can hook them into Chris on the mountain before we reveal this thing, so that it's not setting Chris up to be like, well, I mean, did you see that kid's knee? So just having to balance our stories so that we were accomplishing both of those ideas with full weight.
Yeah. And I think it was 3 or 4 kids that you saw in Nepal. Are they all sponsored kids of Save One Life?
Yeah, they were all sponsored kids from Save One Life, which is cool. And there's over 100 kids in Nepal that are sponsored, which is great. And actually, one of the young men in that, he was wearing like the camo coat on Krishna. He actually got the first knee replacement in Nepal. So he had that really bad knee, and I think it was last year he had surgery and had his knee replaced, which is amazing, which is super cool. Yeah, exciting. So,
and in part only capable or only enabled because of, to the point made earlier, the donation of Factor product. So Octapharma supported this film, and we're grateful for that. They also do donate Factor product to Save One Life to distribute effectively. And without that product, you could not support a surgery like a total knee replacement surgery. So and now you have a 20-year-old who is not nearly as limited in what his life can be as a young adult, expected to provide. And, you know, if he wants to get married, families are going to be looking at, well, how are you going to be able to provide? I mean, these are real world implications. And because of donated medicine and a lot of other things, Kushna was able to get a knee replacement. So it's amazing what we can do to make a difference on what is a really big problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have those kids seen the film? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't think they have yet. Unfortunately, we were trying to figure out how to go to Nepal and do a screening, and then COVID came and like just disrupted everything for this year. So, but we were trying to figure that out. And then we were trying to go maybe next year to do Everest Base Camp Track 2 and like go visit them and do another, like a big screening for everybody there. But I don't think that's going to happen now. And so, but we're going to figure it out somehow so they can see it for sure. Because they were definitely a big part of, I think, like my success up there, you know, meeting them, and they like definitely inspired me and felt like they were with me on the climb. So yeah, I feel like it's as much their movie as mine, you know, our movie. So yeah.
we have just a few more minutes. There's one, I see a question in the chat. I just want to make sure it's gotten to. It's from Robert. It's not you, Rob. It's a different Robert.
There's plenty of us.
He wants to know, Chris, what was going through your mind as you left high camp, climbing for 8 to 10 hours, knowing you still might have to go back down?
Not mine.
To recover after the climb.
Yeah.
Aside.
Yeah. So on summit day from high camp to the summit it was 11 hours just up. And the whole time going up, I was just thinking about, all right, I have to go back down to high camp. Like no matter when I get to the summit, like that's just halfway. I still have to go back down. So that was like something that was always in my mind of like, make sure you have enough energy to get back down. Right. And so once I hit the summit and knew I had to go it took another 7 hours to get back to high camp. So it was like an 18-hour day. The hard part too is once you hit like the balcony, which is like a feature on Everest, you can see high camp, but you're still like pretty far from it. And you're walking and it just feels like you're not making any progress. And you're just like, oh my God, I just want to be in my tent, in my sleeping bag. Like, and so it's just hard to like keep focusing on each step, but like, you have to. And like, yeah, it just was hard to like keep motivating, but like you have no choice. Like you have to get down. So
are you in headlamps at that point? Is it?
So we left at 11 p.m. the night before we summited. So we climbed throughout the whole night. And we summited around like 9:30 next morning, 9:40, something like that. So yeah, we climbed a good chunk with headlamps, and that's hard too. It was the coldest I'd ever been. It was like the only climb where, my toes were pretty cold and my fingers were cold, and like you're swinging your feet and your hands to try and get blood down into your fingertips. And it was pretty miserable that whole night. Just remembering, I was like, I can't wait for the sun to come up. It's going to be great. And then the sun came up and I realized I was still really far away. I was like, man, kind of wish the sun was still down. Yeah, so that was hard. And then, coming back down, you're still in the sun, which is good. But as soon as I got back to Camp 4, I was so pumped because I was just like, oh my gosh, I get to sleep. And I hadn't really eaten or drank anything that whole day because I couldn't like bring the energy to like even pull my water bottle out and drink. I only drank like a half a liter of water that day and like couldn't get any food in because like as soon as you take a bite of anything or drink of anything, you're completely out of breath and it feels like you're hyperventilating. I was just like, oh man. So when I got back to Camp 4, I just stuffed a bunch of food and like they had like Gatorade essentially that we could drink, and I just was chugging it. Like it was crazy. But then the next morning you wake up and you're still at Camp 4. So that next day we went about 8 hours back down to Camp 2 and we slept a night there. And then the next day got up and another 8 hours back to base camp. And oh my God, being back at base camp was the best thing ever. And I was like, I don't have to walk anymore. I was like, I was so excited. So happy. So.
And then how long did it take the final question, how long did it take to recover really? Like after this whole ordeal on your back?
It was a while, so like, I just didn't feel right for several weeks, I would say. Like, I don't know, Jess might be able to tell more of like how long I seemed out of it. But like, yeah, I flew home. I felt, I just couldn't eat enough. I was just eating everything in sight. But yeah, it was like several weeks before I felt like pretty close to back to normal. It was funny. I was home for like 3 days and then I left to go on a work trip for a week. And my coworkers at Gut Monkey, they were awesome. They bought me all these chips and stuff, and I was just like stuffing my face. It was great. But like halfway through the day, I would just turn to Pat, my boss, and I was like jet lagged and tired. And I would just turn to him and be like, I'm so tired right now. Like I just like couldn't keep my eyes open. Yeah. But yeah, it was a little rough for a while, but totally worth it.
Zero regrets? Zero regrets?
Zero regrets. None. Yeah. Oh yeah. And then like I see Kevin wrote, and I was on a canoe trip. Yeah. So 2 weeks after I went to Oregon for a program, then I went to Montana for a week on a canoe trip with Hemophilia community, which was
Jess.
So that's obviously a very crazy thing to do, but what was neat to be at events with Chris when he came back, to watch everybody, but especially young people and teenagers and kids come up to him and just, whatever they want to ask, but just being with him, seeing him at their event, knowing what he accomplished, seeing him in a leadership role, getting to witness that was really cool. Whether or not Chris should have gone back to work that quickly is another story, but
Sure.
the impact he had in getting to watch that happen was pretty neat.
Sure, I see. Yeah.
And-
Yeah. I think you said, or maybe you said it to me in our first call about this, or maybe it was in the film. So forgive me for not remembering exactly. But about so much of this is about a paradigm shift even within the hemophilia community. That's also part of the mission of imagining or reimagining what might be possible.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, it wasn't necessarily about like encouraging people to go climb Everest, because I don't think that's the message. I think that was my dream, but I do want people to have a dream and a passion and not let hemophilia be the thing that stops you from that. So like, and I think that's also why I wanted to work with Patrick so much on this, is he's a guy with hemophilia that has a dream too of creating content and creating films, and it's very different than my dream, but he's not letting hemophilia stop him from that dream either. And I think the two of us making this film, I think that's what I'm most proud about, is two guys with hemophilia, with dreams, making it happen without letting hemophilia stop us, and limit us. So I think that's one of the coolest parts about this whole thing.
Well, thank you. I'm sure I know you're making a difference for sure.
Yeah.
All over the world.
Appreciate that.
Of course.
I know we're at our time, Anthony, but I do want to ask you, you're on a show people might know you from right now, Star Trek Discovery. Is that coming back, or is there anything that is going on with you that we could be aware of?
Yeah, it's coming. Season 3 starts streaming on CBS All Access on October 15th. There's 13 episodes, and they'll come out weekly. And then we go back to work soon. Toronto's been, much better shape than most of the US. Well, all of Canada has been in much better shape with COVID than most of the US. So they've been in production on other shows for a couple months now, and things are going well enough with protocols that we're going to go back into production in November, apparently. So on season 4.
Wow.
So we'll see.
All right.
Strange,
Right on.
Congrats.
Thank you. But it'll be very different to be working in this day and age, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, thank you again for doing this and spending this time with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Congratulations, and thank you for the work you're doing, and all the best to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And bombardierblood.com for anybody who hasn't been there already.
Yeah, way to go. I always forget
Bye
that
all.
part.
Thank you. No problem. I got you covered there.
Bye.